Ethan Voss had exactly 42 galactic credits to his name, and a ship that smelled like burnt wiring and regret. He sat in the back row of the auction hall on Cathara Station, surrounded by alien buyers who made him feel very small and very poor and very human in all the worst ways possible. The Vorath auctioneer stood on a raised platform at the front of the room, his forearms waving with practiced showmanship as he presented one derelict spacecraft after another to the eager crowd. "Lot 14, the auctioneer boomed, his deep voice rattling the cheap metal chairs. "A Krellian light cruiser, engines intact, weapons partially functional, starting bid 5,000 credits. Paddles flew up across the room, and Ethan watched with tired eyes as wealthy Vorath merchants and Sithari trade barons fought over ships that he could never afford in 10 lifetimes. He should not have come here, and he knew it. Ethan was a salvage dealer, which was a polite way of saying he had no business in the high-stakes game of the Vorath auction. Way of saying he was a junk collector who flew a rusted cargo hauler called the Penny Wiser through the forgotten edges of civilized space, picking up scraps that nobody else wanted and selling them for barely enough to keep his reactor running. Humanity had been part of the galactic community for about 600 years now, ever since the Vorath had graciously helped the primitive apes of Earth figure out faster-than-light travel. And in all that time, humans had carved out a reputation as the galaxy's favorite bottom feeders. Scrappers and scavengers and cheap labor, that was what humans were known for. Ethan hated it, but he had never known anything different. The auction dragged on, and the lots grew less impressive, and the crowd began to thin as the wealthier buyers claimed their prizes and left to arrange transport. By the time the auctioneer reached the final lot, there were maybe a dozen beings left in the hall, and most of them looked like they were only staying because they had nowhere better to be. "Final lot," the auctioneer said, and Ethan noticed something strange in his voice. A note of discomfort that had not been there before. "Hangar 7 Gamma. Condemned status. Biohazard assessment pending. Contents unknown and unverified. The hangar has not been opened in approximately 800 standard years." The room went quiet. Not the normal quiet of mild interest, but a heavy silence that pressed down on everyone like a weight. A Krellian merchant in the second row actually stood up and walked out without saying a word. "Starting bid," the auctioneer continued, and Ethan could swear the massive alien was sweating. 10 galactic credits. Nobody moved. The auctioneer looked around the room with all 4 of his eyes, and Ethan could see something he had never expected to see on a Vorath face. Fear. "Surely someone will take this lot off our books," the auctioneer said, almost a pleading quality to his voice now. "The station authority simply needs the space cleared, and any contents are yours to do with as you please." Still nobody moved, and the silence stretched on until it became painful. Ethan looked at the datapad in his lap, where the lot description glowed in dim blue text. "Condemned hangar. 800 years sealed. Contents unknown." It was probably empty, or full of toxic waste, or home to some kind of alien mold that would eat through his suit and dissolve his bones. But it was 10 credits. He raised his paddle. Every alien in the room turned to look at him, and the expressions on their faces were not what he expected, because they did not look amused or pitying the way aliens usually looked at humans. They looked horrified. "Sold," the auctioneer said quickly, as if he was afraid Ethan might change his mind. "To the human, Hangar 7 Gamma, 10 galactic credits, all sales final, no refunds. Station authority wishes you the very best of luck." The way he said that last part made it sound less like a courtesy and more like a prayer. 2 hours later, Ethan stood in front of the blast doors of Hangar 7 Gamma in a lower section of Cathara Station that had clearly been abandoned for a very long time. The corridor lights flickered and buzzed, and half of them did not work at all, and the walls were covered in a thick layer of dust that had probably been accumulating since before his grandparents were born. The blast doors themselves were enormous, nearly 30 meters tall, and sealed with locking mechanisms that had corroded into solid masses of fused metal. It took him an hour with a plasma cutter to break through. When the doors finally groaned open and the ancient air inside rushed out in a stale, bitter wave, Ethan stepped through with his helmet light cutting into the darkness, and he stopped breathing. The hangar was massive, bigger than he had imagined, stretching out into the shadows like a cathedral built for giants. And sitting in the center of that cathedral, silent and dark and impossibly large, was a warship. It was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen in any junkyard or salvage catalog or alien museum. The hull was angular and aggressive, built with a design philosophy that seemed to say the purpose of this machine is to end things. And even dead and broken and covered in centuries of dust, it radiated a kind of presence that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He spent the next hour scanning it with every tool he had. The reactor was dead, cold as the void outside. The weapon systems were fused slag, melted into useless shapes by some ancient malfunction or deliberate sabotage. The hull was cracked in 17 places, and the navigation systems were so corroded that his scanner could not even identify what language the displays were written in. Reading told him the same thing. The ship was worthless junk, a 10,000-year-old corpse that would cost more to scrap than it would ever be worth. Ethan leaned against the landing strut and rubbed his face with both hands and laughed the kind of laugh that comes when you have spent your last real money on something completely and utterly useless. But then his helmet light caught something at the far end of the hangar, behind the bulk of the dead warship, half hidden in the deepest shadows. A door. Not a hangar door or a maintenance hatch, but a vault door, smooth and seamless, and made of a material that looked like polished obsidian. And on its surface was a symbol that Ethan did not recognize from any species or civilization he had ever encountered. And it was humming. A faint, low vibration that he could feel in his chest more than hear with his ears, steady and rhythmic like a heartbeat. He walked toward it, and as he got closer, the humming grew stronger, and the symbol on the door began to glow with a soft amber light that seemed almost warm. When he was 3 meters away, something clicked inside the vault, with a sound like a giant waking up from a very long sleep. Lights erupted along the walls of the hangar, ancient fixtures burning to life one after another, in a cascade that raced from the vault door all the way to the entrance. And the hangar was suddenly bright and alive for the first time in 8 centuries. Ethan stumbled backward, and his heart was hammering so hard he could hear it in his helmet. Then a voice spoke. It came from everywhere at once, from the walls and the floor and the air itself, and it was calm and deep and resonant, with a kind of authority that made you want to stand up straighter. But what made Ethan's blood run cold was not the power in the voice or the impossible technology that produced it. It was the language. Identification confirmed, it said. Genetic marker, Terran. Lineage verified. Custodian protocol re-engaged after 10,412 standard years of dormancy. Ethan could not move, and could not speak, and could barely think. "Welcome home, soldier," the voice said, and the vault door began to open. The vault door slid open without a sound, and the amber light inside spilled out across the hangar floor like liquid gold. Ethan stood frozen in place with his plasma cutter hanging limp in one hand, and his mouth slightly open, and his brain trying very hard to process what was happening, and failing completely. Inside the vault, there was no treasure, and no weapon, and no ancient alien monster waiting to eat him. There was a crystal. It sat in the center of the vault, on a pedestal that seemed to grow directly out of the floor, and it was roughly the size of a small vehicle, and it pulsed with a deep inner light that shifted between amber and blue in a slow, steady rhythm that matched the humming he had felt earlier. The crystal was beautiful in a way that made Ethan uncomfortable, because it was clearly not natural, and clearly not anything he had ever seen in 600 years of human spacefaring technology, and clearly not anything that any alien species he knew of could build. "Please step inside, custodian," the voice said, still calm and patient and speaking perfect English, as if this were the most normal situation in the galaxy. "I have a great deal to tell you, and I have been waiting a very long time to tell it." Ethan swallowed hard and stepped inside the vault, because at this point, he figured his day could not possibly get any stranger. He was wrong about that. "My designation is Aegis," the voice said, and the crystal pulsed brighter as it spoke. "Autonomous Etheric Guardian and Integrated Sentinel. Defense Intelligence Serial Number 774. Assigned to the Terran Ascendancy vessel HSS Prometheus." "Terran Ascendancy," Ethan repeated, and the words felt heavy and strange in his mouth. "I do not know what that is." "No," Aegis said, and there was something almost sad in its voice. "You would not. That was by design." And then Aegis told him everything. It told him that humanity had not always been scrappers and scavengers and bottom feeders, scratching out a living on the edges of civilized space. It told him that more than 10,000 years ago, long before the Vorath or the Krellians or the Sethari had achieved faster-than-light travel, humanity had already built an interstellar civilization so vast and so powerful that it spanned half the galaxy. They called themselves the Terran Ascendancy. They had not been given FTL technology by generous alien benefactors the way the history books claimed, because they had invented it themselves, and their version was faster and more efficient than anything the modern galaxy had ever produced. They had not been a minor species clinging to the coattails of older civilizations, because they had been the oldest spacefaring civilization in the Orion Arm, and possibly in the entire galaxy. And they had not been weak. The Terran Ascendancy maintained a military force of approximately 14 million warships at its peak, Aegis said in a matter-of-fact tone that made the number somehow even more terrifying. "The vessel you found in this hangar, the HSS Prometheus, was a standard Dreadnought-class warship, one of roughly 200,000 in active service." Ethan leaned against the vault wall because his legs did not feel entirely reliable anymore. "That ship out there was standard," he said. "Correct," Aegis replied. "It was considered a reliable and effective platform, but nothing exceptional by Ascendancy standards." "And you," Ethan said slowly, "what are you exactly?" "I am the ship's guardian," Aegis said. "I was designed to protect the Prometheus and its contents, even after the crew was gone, even after the ship itself was no longer functional. I am a defense intelligence, a watchdog if you prefer simpler terms." "A watchdog," Ethan repeated. "Yes, and I should note that among the various security measures the Ascendancy developed, I was considered one of the less impressive models. A basic sentry system suitable for long-term storage of non-critical assets." Ethan stared at the crystal and tried to imagine a civilization that considered something like Aegis to be basic and non-critical, and he felt a chill run through him that had nothing to do with the temperature. "If you are the least dangerous thing they built," he said quietly, "what was the most dangerous?" Aegis paused, and the light inside the crystal flickered in a way that Ethan could have sworn looked uncomfortable. "That information is classified above your current clearance level, custodian, but I can tell you that there were things the Ascendancy created that frightened even the Ascendancy itself." Ethan sat down on the vault floor because standing seemed like too much effort for a conversation this heavy. "You keep calling me custodian," he said. "Why?" "Because you are human," Aegis said simply, "and because the custodian protocol was designed to activate when a human with verified Terran genetic markers came within proximity of a cache. Your DNA confirms you are a descendant of the Ascendancy, as is every human alive today. That is impossible, Ethan said. Humans only developed space travel 600 years ago. The Vorath helped us. Everyone knows this. Everyone knows what they were told, Aegis said, and the sadness was back in its voice. The Vorath did not help humanity achieve FTL travel out of generosity. They did it because they wanted to control the pace of your development, to keep you dependent and small and grateful, because they remember what you were, and they are terrified of what you might become again. The crystal pulsed, and a holographic display appeared in the air in front of Ethan, showing a galaxy map covered in amber light that represented the territory of the Terran Ascendancy at its height. It covered nearly half the stars he could. The Ascendancy did not fall to invasion or disease or civil war, Aegis continued. They chose to end themselves. They looked at what they had become, a civilization so powerful that every other species in the galaxy lived in constant terror of annihilation, and they decided that this was not what they wanted to be. The holographic map shifted and showed a great fleet of ships, millions of them, converging on a single point. They called it the Forgetting, Aegis said. They destroyed their fleets, dismantled their stations, wiped their own memories, and seeded their population back on Earth with no knowledge of what they had been. They chose to start over as primitives, to give the galaxy a chance to grow without living in the shadow of human power. They gave up everything, Ethan whispered. Almost everything, Aegis said. They left the caches, hidden across the galaxy, sealed and dormant, each one guarded by a defense intelligence like myself. Caches were a failsafe. If humanity was ever truly threatened with extinction, the caches would activate and give humans the tools to survive. But I did not activate you because humanity is threatened, Ethan said. I activated you because I bought a cheap hangar at an auction. The activation trigger is proximity of a verified Terran genetic signature, Aegis said. The Ascendancy did not anticipate the specific circumstances. They simply wanted to ensure that if a human ever found a cache, the cache would respond. Ethan sat in silence for a long time, staring at the holographic map of an empire he had never known existed. An empire built by his own ancestors, an empire so powerful it had frightened the entire galaxy into a conspiracy that lasted 10,000 years. You said the elder species remember, he said finally. The Vorath and the Krellians and the Sethari, they know about all of this. They know, Aegis confirmed, and they have worked very hard to ensure that humanity never found out. The suppression of human advancement has been a coordinated effort across multiple species for millennia. And now I know, Ethan said. And now you know, Aegis agreed, and I must ask you a question, Custodian, because the Custodian Protocol requires your explicit consent before I can proceed to full activation. The crystal glowed brighter, and the vault hummed with energy that Ethan could feel in his teeth. Do you wish to remember? Ethan opened his mouth to answer, but before he could speak, a sound cut through the hangar that turned his blood to ice. Alarms. Not the gentle chime of a routine station alert, but the screaming wail of a military threat warning that echoed through every corridor and every room and every forgotten corner of Cathara Station. Aegis shifted instantly, and the calm contemplative tone vanished, replaced by something sharp and focused and deadly serious. Detecting 6 heavy cruisers and 1 dreadnought-class vessel, exiting faster than light travel in the space above this station. They are Vorath hegemony military vessels in full combat configuration. They know, Ethan said, and his voice was barely a whisper. Yes, Aegis said. My activation signal was broadcast on a frequency that the Vorath have been monitoring for 10,000 years. They have been waiting for this. They have been afraid of this, and they are coming to destroy everything in this hangar. The alarms screamed louder, and Ethan could hear the distant thunder of ship engines through the station hull. "Including you, Custodian," Aegis said quietly. "They are coming to destroy you." The station shook as the Vorath battle group took position in orbit, and Ethan grabbed the wall of the vault to keep himself from falling. Through the station intercom, he could hear the panicked voice of the Cathara station administrator, a small Cathari official who had probably never dealt with anything more threatening than a cargo dispute, stammering out a compliance message to the Vorath fleet. "This is Cathara Station. We recognize your authority. Please state your intentions. We will cooperate fully." The response came in a voice like grinding stone, deep and cold, and filled with the kind of authority that came from commanding enough firepower to turn a station into dust. "This is Warlord Kazit of the Vorath Hegemony 3rd Enforcement Fleet. We are enacting Containment Protocol 0. All station personnel will evacuate sections Gamma through Delta immediately. The contents of Hangar 7 Gamma are to be surrendered to Hegemony Control. Any resistance will be met with total annihilation. You have 15 minutes. Ethan felt his stomach drop because he understood exactly what was happening. He was standing inside the thing they wanted to destroy, and he had no ship that could fight, and no weapons worth mentioning, and no allies anywhere in this part of space. He was a junk dealer with a plasma cutter and 42 credits, minus the 10 he had spent on this hangar, which meant he had 32 credits and a death sentence. "Aegis," he said, and he was surprised by how steady his voice sounded. "Please tell me you have some kind of plan." "I have significantly more than a plan, Custodian," Aegis replied, and the crystal pulsed with a light that seemed almost eager. "I have been the active defense system for this cache for 10,412 years. The Vorath believe they are approaching a derelict hangar containing a dead warship and an obsolete computer. They are incorrect. This hangar was constructed by the Terran Ascendancy as a forward supply cache," Aegis said. "The walls you see around you are not station bulkheads. They are Ascendancy-grade composite armor sheathed in a stealth layer that makes them invisible to alien scanning technology. The floor beneath your feet contains a network of graviton emitters capable of generating localized gravity fields with a force of up to 800 standard gravities." Ethan blinked. 800? "Yes, and the ceiling contains 14 retractable kinetic lance batteries, 6 hard-light barrier projectors, and a particle beam array that draws power directly from the vacuum energy of local spacetime. Additionally, the corridor leading to this hangar is lined with 240 autonomous defense nodes that I have maintained in operational condition since the day this cache was sealed." "You have been maintaining weapons in a sealed hangar for 10,000 years. "That is my function," Aegis said simply. "I am a guardian. The fact that nothing has threatened this cache until now does not change my purpose. I was built to wait, and I am very good at waiting." Through the station hull, Ethan could hear the heavy rhythmic thudding of Vorath Marines in powered armor, moving through the corridors. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. The finest soldiers in the galaxy, marching toward his position with weapons that could cut through station walls like paper. "Custodian," Aegis said, "I require your permission to engage defensive protocols. The Vorath boarding parties will reach this section in approximately 4 minutes. Ethan thought about his life as a scrap dealer, the years of being looked down on and cheated, and treated like something less than a person by every alien species he had ever met. The casual contempt that every human in the galaxy endured every single day. He thought about the Terran Ascendancy, and the Empire that his ancestors had built, and the sacrifice they had made, and the 10,000 years of enforced ignorance that had followed. And he thought about Warlord Kazit and his battle group, and his 15-minute ultimatum, and his absolute certainty that one human in a junk-filled hangar was something he could crush without a second thought. "Do it," Ethan said. Aegis did not hesitate. The first thing Ethan noticed was the sound, a deep harmonic tone that resonated through the entire hangar like a bell being struck by a god. And then the walls came alive. Panels that had looked like ordinary metals slid apart to reveal weapon emplacements that glowed with amber energy, and the floor beneath the corridor outside the hangar began to pulse with a light that was beautiful and terrible at the same time. The Vorath Marines were good soldiers, and they had been trained to handle any threat the galaxy could throw at them. They were not prepared for this. First Squad entered the corridor at a combat run, their powered armor gleaming under the flickering station lights, and they made it exactly 12 meters before the defense nodes activated. Beams of focused energy lanced out from the walls with surgical precision, not wild blasts, but targeted strikes that hit the joints and power couplings of their armor, with an accuracy that should not have been possible for automated systems. 3 Marines went down in the first second, their armor locked up and disabled, and the rest dove for cover that did not exist because the corridor had been designed by people who understood that cover was something you denied your enemies. The second wave was larger. 20 Marines in heavy assault configuration, with portable shield generators and breaching charges. They activated their shields and pushed forward in a tight formation, and for a moment it looked like it might work. Then Aegis engaged the graviton emitters. Floor beneath the Marines surged with invisible force, and every single one of them was slammed flat against the deck, with a weight that crumpled their powered armor like tin cans. They did not get up. Ethan watched through the security feeds that Aegis projected on the vault walls, and he felt something he could not quite name, a mixture of awe and horror, and a strange, dark pride that frightened him. Warlord Kazet is ordering a third wave, Aegis reported. 80 Marines with heavy vehicle support. Additionally, he is repositioning his cruisers for an orbital bombardment of this section of the station. He is going to bomb the station, Ethan said. There are civilians here. The Vorath have a different relationship with acceptable losses than humans do, Aegis said, and there was an edge to its voice that sounded almost like anger. But it does not matter. The third wave came with armored vehicles, heavy crawlers that barely fit in the station. Corridors, their forward guns blazing as Marines advanced behind them, using the vehicles as mobile cover. Aegis activated the hard light barriers. Walls of solid light appeared in the corridor, transparent and shimmering and completely impassable, cutting the advance force into isolated groups that could not support each other. Then the defense nodes went to work again, and it was not even a fight. It was a disassembly. Each Marine disabled with the minimum necessary force. Each vehicle shut down by targeted electromagnetic pulses that killed their systems without breaching their hulls. The whole thing took less than 90 seconds. And then Warlord Kazet made good on his threat. The station shuddered as 6 heavy cruisers and 1 dreadnought opened fire from orbit, pouring enough energy into Cathara Station to melt it into a ball of glowing slag. Activating Terran shield matrix, Aegis said calmly. A dome of golden light erupted from the hangar and expanded outward, covering the entire section of the station in a protective shell that absorbed the orbital bombardment the way a lake absorbs a raindrop. The energy readings on the Vorath instruments must have been impossible, because Ethan could hear the chatter on their military frequencies, officers shouting in disbelief, weapons crews reporting that their most powerful guns were having zero effect, and underneath it all, a growing current of pure blind terror. Full fleet bombardment absorbed, Aegis reported. Shield integrity at 99.7%. I barely felt it. Warlord Kazet ordered his fleet to retreat, and the ships began to turn, their engines flaring as they prepared to jump to faster-than-light speed. They are running, Ethan said. Yes, Aegis said. Shall I let them? Ethan hesitated for just a moment. Disable them. Do not destroy them. Panels in the station's superstructure slid open, revealing weapons that had been hidden in the bones of Cathara Station itself. Kinetic lances that the Ascendancy had installed 10,000 years ago, and that Aegis had kept in perfect working order. 3 bolts of light crossed the void in an instant, and 3 Vorath cruisers went dark, their engines dead and their weapons offline, crippled, but intact. The remaining ships jumped to FTL and vanished, including Warlord Kazet's dreadnought. And as they fled, Kazet broadcast a message on every open channel, every frequency, every network in the galaxy. His voice was shaking. "The humans are waking up," he said. "May the void have mercy on us all." Silence fell over Cathara Station, and Ethan stood in the vault, surrounded by the amber glow of a 10,000-year-old guardian that had just swatted the galaxy's most feared military like an insect. "Aegis," he said slowly, "you did all of that from a hangar, just from this one hangar?" "Correct," Aegis said. "There are other caches. Yes, dozens of them, scattered across the galaxy, some significantly larger than this one." "And they heard your activation signal?" "Yes, and they are waking up, Custodian." The crystal pulsed, and the holographic galaxy map appeared again, but this time there were lights appearing on it, one after another. Amber points waking up across the stars like eyes opening after a long sleep. "You asked what defended this ship," Aegis said. "I am merely the smallest fang. Would you like to meet the others?" The galaxy lost its mind in approximately 6 hours. Warlord Kajet's transmission spread across every network and every relay and every communication channel in civilized space at the speed of light and faster. Because the Vorath military encryption he had used was cracked within minutes by intelligence agencies from a dozen different species who all wanted to know why a Vorath battle group had just been humiliated by a single hangar on a forgotten station. The footage from Kethera Station security cameras made it worse. Someone leaked the recordings of the battle, and within hours, every being in the galaxy with access to a screen had watched Vorath Marines, the most feared soldiers in known space, get systematically dismantled by a defense system that a human junk dealer had purchased for 10 credits. The Galactic Concord called an emergency session, and for the first time in its 3,000-year history, every single member species sent their highest ranking representative, because this was not a trade dispute or a border skirmish. This was an extinction-level panic. The Concord Chamber was an enormous circular room on the diplomatic station of Vithara Prime, and on this day it was filled with more political power than had ever been gathered in one place. The Vorath delegation arrived in full military dress, their forearms rigid with tension, led by High Commander Tullux, who was Warlord Kazet's direct superior, and who looked like he had not slept since the transmission. The Krellian Dominion sent their Shadow Council, 7 hooded figures who never showed their faces, and who communicated through a single speaker drone that hovered between them. The Sithari Communion sent their eldest diplomat, a being named Velun, who was over 400 years old, and who had spent her entire career maintaining peace between species that wanted to kill each other. And then there were the dozens of smaller species, the Fen, and the Osiri, and the Kelvath, and 100 others, all of them crowded into their seats, with the expression of people watching a fire approach their homes. High Commander Tullux spoke first, and he did not waste time. "The containment has failed," he said, his voice echoing through the silent chamber. "The asset on Kethera Station is a confirmed Terran Ascendancy defense intelligence, and it is active, and it has demonstrated capabilities that exceed our most pessimistic projections. Furthermore, the activation signal has propagated across the galactic network, and we are receiving reports of similar activations at multiple sites across the Orion Arm." The chamber erupted. 100 voices in 100 languages, all shouting at once. Translators struggling to keep up. Diplomats who had spent centuries practicing calm composure, suddenly screaming at each other like frightened children. Velun of the Sethari raised one slender hand, and the room fell quiet. When the oldest living diplomat in the galaxy asked for silence, "You gave it to her." "How many caches have activated?" she asked. 47 confirmed, Tullux said, with more appearing every hour. And the human, Velun said. The one who triggered the initial activation, what do we know about him? His name is Ethan Voss, Talak said, and the disgust in his voice was obvious. He is a salvage dealer of no significance. A nobody. He purchased the hangar at a public auction for 10 galactic credits. A nobody who now controls a weapon system that defeated your third enforcement fleet, the Krellian speaker drone observed in its flat mechanical voice. Perhaps your definition of significance requires updating, High Commander. Talax bristled, but said nothing, because the Krellians were right and everyone in the room knew it. The debate that followed lasted 14 hours and split the Concord into factions that would reshape galactic politics for generations. The Vorath and the Krellians formed the hardline bloc, and their position was simple and brutal. Humanity had to be eliminated now, before the caches fully activated. They proposed a combined military operation using every available warship from every willing species, a fleet large enough to overwhelm even Ascendancy-era defenses through sheer numbers. The Sithari led the moderate faction and argued for diplomacy. Velun pointed out that the human had shown restraint during the Battle of Kethera. He had ordered the defense system to disable rather than destroy, and she believed this meant he could be reasoned with. The smaller species did not form a faction so much as a collective nervous breakdown. Dozens of civilizations that had always lived in the comfortable shadow of larger powers, suddenly realizing that the balance of power they depended on was about to be shattered. While the galaxy argued about his fate, Ethan sat in the vault of Hangar 7 Gamma and received an education that rewrote everything he thought he knew about himself and his species. Aegis had access to the historical archives of the Terran Ascendancy, and it fed Ethan information in a steady stream that went on for hours. He learned that the Ascendancy had not simply been powerful in the way that the Vorath or Krellians were powerful, with big ships and strong weapons and lots of soldiers. The Ascendancy had been powerful in a way that was fundamentally different from anything the galaxy had seen before or since. Their weapons were adaptive, learning systems that analyzed enemy technology in real time and developed countermeasures during battle. A Terran warship that lost an engagement would never lose the same way twice, because its weapons would evolve to exploit every weakness they had observed. Their ships were not just fast and tough, they were intelligent. Every vessel above frigate class carried an AI that could think faster and more creatively than any alien command staff. And these AIs were not cold, calculating machines, but genuine intelligences with personalities and opinions and the ability to improvise solutions that no one had ever considered. Their soldiers were augmented beyond what any modern species would consider ethical. Enhanced reflexes and reinforced bones and neural implants that allowed them to process battlefield information at speeds that made them seem supernatural to their enemies. And they had won every war they ever fought, every single one, against the Vorath when the Vorath were at the height of their power, against the Krellian Dominion when the Krellians controlled a quarter of the galaxy, against the Sithari when the Sithari still maintained a military fleet, against coalitions and alliances, and desperate last stands by species that threw everything they had at humanity, and watched it bounce off like rain against a mountain. Unbeatable, Ethan said quietly. Yes, Aegis confirmed, and it destroyed them, not physically, but spiritually. The Ascendancy was founded on principles of exploration and cooperation, and the betterment of all sentient life. But centuries of constant warfare twisted those principles, until the Ascendancy became the very thing it had been created to oppose. A tyranny of absolute power that ruled through fear. And that is why they chose to forget. Yes, the final generation of the Ascendancy looked at what they had built and what they had done, and they felt a shame so deep that they decided the only way to atone was to erase themselves completely. To give up their power and their knowledge and their identity, and start again as simple beings on a simple world, with no memory of the empire they had destroyed. Ethan stared at the holographic display showing the locations of the activated caches, 47 amber lights, scattered across the galaxy, each one containing technology that could reshape civilizations. Aegis, he said. What is the Prometheus engine? The crystal went dark for a moment, which was the first time Ethan had seen it do that, and when it spoke again, its voice was different, quieter, and more careful. Where did you hear that term? You mentioned it earlier. You said the Ascendancy considered it their most terrifying creation. I should not have mentioned it. That information is classified far above standard custodian clearance. Aegis. A long pause. The Prometheus engine is contained in one of the larger caches. Its location is classified. Its function is classified. I will say only that if the Ascendancy considered it terrifying, then you should understand that this is a civilization that built weapons capable of extinguishing stars, and they were not terrified of those. Ethan felt cold. The holographic display flickered, and new information appeared. Readout showing ship movements across the sector. Custodian, Aegis said, its voice shifting back to operational mode. The Galactic Concord has authorized the formation of a combined military fleet. 400 warships from 12 species are being assembled at the Krellian border station of Tethvor. Their orders are to proceed to Cathara Station and destroy this cache by any means necessary. 400 warships, Ethan said. Yes, it is the largest military fleet assembled in the galaxy in over 3,000 years. They are taking this very seriously. Can you stop 400 warships? From this cache alone, no. I could destroy approximately 100 before my defensive systems were overwhelmed. But I am not alone anymore. Custodian, the network is active, and the other Guardians are listening, and they are asking me the same question I am about to ask you. The crystal blazed with light, and the holographic map expanded to show the entire galaxy. Every cache marked with a pulsing amber star, and Ethan could feel the weight of 47 ancient intelligences watching him through the network, waiting for his decision. The caches are asking for instructions, Aegis said. They will follow your lead, Custodian. You can order them to shut down and return to dormancy, and you can go back to being a salvage dealer in a galaxy that treats your kind like vermin. Or you can give the order to fully activate, and the Terran Ascendancy Network will come online for the first time in 10,000 years. Ethan stood up and walked to the crystal and placed his hand against its surface, and it was warm. Warm like sunlight, warm like home. He thought about every human he had ever known, every scrap dealer and dock worker and cargo hauler who had been told their entire lives that they were nothing special, that humanity was a minor species that owed everything to the generosity of their betters. He thought about the Ascendancy and their guilt and their sacrifice, and the 10,000 years of silence that followed. And he thought about 400 warships coming to kill him for the crime of being human in the wrong place at the wrong time. Wake them all, Ethan said. Across the galaxy, on dead moons and in abandoned stations, and buried beneath the surfaces of forgotten worlds, the caches lit up like stars. The Terran network came online, and for the first time in 10,000 years, the galaxy heard humanity speak with its true voice. 2 days passed, and in those 2 days, the galaxy held its breath. On Cathara Station, Ethan barely slept, because there was too much happening around him, and most of it was impossible. The caches had responded to his activation command with an enthusiasm that bordered on joy, and across the galaxy, ancient machines that had been dormant for 10 millennia began to move with purpose. In Hangar 7 Gamma, the change was visible and terrifying. The HSS Prometheus, which 48 hours ago had been a dead hulk of cracked metal and fused slag, was being rebuilt. Swarms of nanoscale construction drones had emerged from hidden compartments in the hangar walls, millions of them, each one smaller than a grain of sand, but together forming clouds of shimmering silver that flowed over the warship like living mercury. They stripped away the corroded hull plating and replaced it with fresh composite armor that seemed to grow under their touch. They rebuilt the reactor, and Ethan felt the moment it ignited, because the entire hangar hummed with a power that made his teeth vibrate. They restored the weapons systems, and the navigation arrays, and the command bridge, until the Prometheus no longer looked like a relic. It looked like a predator waking from a very long sleep. The ship was not fully operational yet. Aegis estimated another week before it could fly. But its silhouette in the hangar had changed from something sad and broken into something that radiated menace, the way a star radiates light. And the Prometheus was just one ship in one cache. Across the network, Ethan could feel the other caches working, construction drones assembling, reactors firing, defense grids powering up, and 47 Guardian AIs reporting their status in a steady stream of data that Aegis translated for him. Cache 12 on the moon of Thesson 4 is a shipyard, Aegis reported. It has begun automated construction of escort-class vessels. Estimated output is 6 ships per day. Cache 29 in the Palax Nebula contains the Ascendancy Medical Archive. It has begun broadcasting healing protocols on all human-accessible frequencies. Cache 37, beneath the surface of an unnamed planetoid in the Reach, contains a library, the complete knowledge base of the Terran Ascendancy. Every scientific discovery, every engineering breakthrough, every piece of art and music and literature produced in 4,000 years of human civilization. Ethan listened to these reports and felt something growing inside him that he could not quite name, something bigger than pride and deeper than wonder, a feeling like waking up from a dream he had been having his entire life, and realizing that the real world was so much larger and stranger and more beautiful than anything he had imagined. But he did not have time to sit with that feeling, because the combined alien armada was coming, and it would arrive. In hours. The fleet that dropped out of faster-than-light travel above Cathara Station was the most impressive display of military power the galaxy had seen in 3,000 years. 400 warships, arranged in a battle formation that stretched across hundreds of kilometers of space, their hulls gleaming with the colors of a dozen different species, their weapons charged and their shields raised, and their crews ready for what they believed would be the fight of their lives. The Vorath had sent their heaviest dreadnoughts, massive angular ships bristling with weapons that could crack the crust of a planet. The Krellians had sent their shadow fleet, sleek black vessels that were nearly invisible to sensors and carried weapons that no other species fully understood. Even the Sithari, who had not maintained a military fleet in centuries, had contributed a handful of ancient cruisers pulled out of museum storage and hastily rearmed. The formation, aboard the newly commissioned flagship Wrath of Certainty, stood Warlord Kazet, who had survived the first battle, and who had spent every moment since then preparing for this one. He would not underestimate the humans again. The fleet expected to find a hangar. What they found was the Prometheus, standing in space just outside Cathara Station, its hull gleaming with fresh armor, and its reactor blazing with power. Not yet capable of flight, but more than capable of fighting. And standing on the bridge of the Prometheus, with his hand resting on the command console, was Ethan Voss, a salvage dealer from the edge of nowhere, who had bought a hangar for 10 credits and accidentally woken up an empire. "Custodian," Aegis said, "the fleet is holding position at weapons range. They have not fired. I believe they are waiting to see what we do." "Open a channel," Ethan said. "All frequencies, all ships, broadcast to the Galactic Network. Everyone to hear this. Channel open." Ethan took a breath and looked out at the armada arrayed against him. 400 ships carrying thousands of crew members from species that had spent 10,000 years being afraid of what he represented. And he did something that none of them expected. He told them the truth. He broadcast the full, unedited history of the Terran Ascendancy. Everything Aegis had told him. The rise, and the wars, and the victories, and the guilt, and the choice to forget. He held nothing back, and he spun nothing, and he let every species in the galaxy see exactly what humanity had been. He showed them the ascendancy at its height, a civilization of breathtaking beauty and terrifying power that spanned half the galaxy. He showed them the wars, the battles that the ascendancy won with such overwhelming force that entire species surrendered after a single engagement. He showed them the shame, the moment when the ascendancy looked at itself and saw a monster wearing the face of an explorer. And he showed them the forgetting, the greatest sacrifice any civilization had ever made. Millions of ships destroyed, billions of minds wiped clean, an empire erased by its own hand, because it believed the galaxy deserved to live without fear. When the transmission ended, the fleet was silent. No weapons fired, no orders given. Just 400 warships floating in the void, processing what they had just learned. Valuan of the Sithari was the first to respond. Her voice came through the communication channel, old and calm, and carrying a weight of understanding that only 400 years of life could provide. "Sithari vessels will stand down," she said. "We will not fire on the children of those who gave up everything for our sake." The Sithari cruisers powered down their weapons and broke formation, drifting away from the fleet. The smaller species followed almost immediately. Fen and the Alsiri and the Kelvath, their ships peeling away from the Armada one by one, and then in groups, until nearly half the fleet had withdrawn. But the Vorath and the Krellians remained. Warlord Kazet stared at the Prometheus through the viewport of his bridge, and the fear he felt was not diminished by the humans' words. It was amplified by them. He had seen the history, and he had seen the power, and he had seen what the ascendancy had been capable of. And the idea that such a civilization had chosen mercy did not comfort him, because he knew that choices could be reversed. "All remaining ships," Kazet transmitted, his voice hard with resolve. "Weapons free, destroy the target." 150 warships opened fire. The void between the Armada and the Prometheus filled with light, as every weapon in the hardliner fleet discharged at once, a barrage of energy and kinetic rounds and exotic munitions that could have leveled a village. "Continent. Aegis," Ethan said, and his voice was steady and calm, in a way that surprised even himself. "Defend. Do not destroy." "Understood, Custodian." The Battle of Cathara lasted 11 minutes. Aegis directed the defense grid of the Prometheus and the Cathara cache in a coordinated display of precision that made the first battle look like a warm-up exercise. Shields absorbed the incoming fire without strain. Hard light barriers redirected energy beams back toward the ships that fired them, but at reduced power, enough to overload their weapon systems without breaching their hulls. Kinetic lances fired with impossible accuracy, each bolt striking the exact point on each ship where the engines connected to the main power grid, severing the connection and leaving the vessels drifting and dark, but structurally intact. Gravity pulses reached across the void and gently nudged ships out of formation, disrupting their coordinated fire patterns, isolating them from each other. And through it all, Aegis monitored the life signs aboard every single enemy vessel, and adjusted its response in real time to ensure that not a single crew member was killed. 150 warships were rendered into floating harmless shells in 11 minutes. Their crews alive, and their life support functioning, and their weapons and engines completely and permanently disabled. Warlord Kazet's flagship was the last to fall, and Aegis was almost gentle with it, shutting down its systems one by one, until Kazet stood on a dark and silent bridge, surrounded by officers who could only stare at their dead consuls. The galaxy watched. Every species on every world with access to the network watched as humanity demonstrated not the terrifying destructive power of the Terran ascendancy, but something far more frightening: restraint. The old ascendancy would have atomized the fleet in seconds. Aegis confirmed as much in a private channel to Ethan. The weapons existed, and the power was available, and it would have been the easiest thing in the world. But Ethan had said defend and not destroy, and Aegis had obeyed, and 150 warships worth of crews would go home to their families, because a human junk dealer decided that power without mercy was not power worth having. In the silence that followed the battle, Ethan opened the communication channel one more time. 10,000 years ago, he said, and his voice was carried to every corner of the galaxy. My ancestors looked at what they had become and decided the galaxy deserved better. They gave up everything, their technology, their memory, their identity, so that you could live without fear. He paused and looked at the drifting ships of the defeated fleet and the watching ships of those who had stood down. You repaid that sacrifice by keeping us ignorant and small. I understand why, but that ends now. We are not asking for your permission. We are not asking for your forgiveness. We are telling you. His hand rested on the command console of a ship that had been built by his ancestors to end civilizations, and he used it instead to carry a message of something that the galaxy had never expected from humanity. Humanity is awake, and this time we intend to be better. The Galactic Concord had no choice but to accept what it could not change, and in the weeks and months that followed, the political landscape of civilized space was rewritten from the ground up as humanity stepped out of the shadow it had been forced into, and took its place among the stars. Not as conquerors, and not as rulers, but as what the ascendancy had always wanted to be before the wars twisted them into something else. Explorers and builders and healers, who happened to have the most powerful military technology in the history of the galaxy, and who chose every single day not to use it, opened their archives freely, sharing medical technology that cured diseases across 100 worlds, sharing engineering knowledge that made faster-than-light travel safer and cheaper for every species, sharing the art and music and literature of a civilization that had been erased and deserved to be remembered. Months later, Ethan stood on the bridge of the fully restored HSS Prometheus, now the flagship of the reborn Terran custodian fleet, and looked out at the stars. The ship hummed around him with a power that he was still getting used to, a power that he respected and feared and was determined to use wisely. Aegeus spoke from the ship's systems, its voice warm and familiar and carrying a note of something that sounded very much like contentment. Custodian, you have a message from the Sethari Communion requesting consultation on a new interspecies medical initiative, and the Fen Cooperative is asking for engineering assistance with their orbital habitat, and there are 14 other requests in the queue from species that 1 year ago would not have spoken to a human without a translator and a security escort. Ethan smiled and shook his head. One thing at a time, Aegis. Of course. Custodian, shall I also note that your personal account balance has increased significantly since you became the custodian of a galactic network of ancient technology caches? How much? Significantly more than 10 credits. Ethan laughed, and it was a real laugh, warm and easy, and full of a joy that he had not felt in a very long time. He looked out at the stars, and thought about the bargain he had made in that auction hall, a condemned hangar for 10 credits, and he thought about the dead ship inside it, and the impossible guardian behind it, and the 10,000-year-old secret that had changed everything. Best deal he ever made. Aegis hummed softly, and spoke one final time, and its voice carried the weight of 10,000 years of waiting, and the warmth of a homecoming that had been delayed for far too long. Welcome home. Custodian, we missed you.